6TR, the bright side of Staffordshire.
Dave Pearce, thank you for joining us on the telephone today. How old were you when you got your first radio show?
Okay, so I was on pirate radio station when I was at school, I have to say. So I think I started doing that when I was like about 15. But I think my first sort of legit radio show was on BBC Radio London, and I think I was about 19 or 20. I can't exactly remember the age, but yeah, pretty young. But it was a great experience getting that kind of first break on the radio in London.
Yeah, and pirate radio was huge in the 80s, and it brought a lot of music that wouldn't have been mainstream to the mainstream, didn't it?
Exactly. I mean, the reason that I got into pirate radio was when I was growing up, there wasn't as many radio stations as there are today. So, what you had, although it was good, it was fairly limited, sort of musically. Everyone was playing the same sort of thing, and there was maybe like, for instance, in London, there was just 2 commercial radio stations. There was a news station, and then there was Capital Radio, which was a music pop station. Then we had Radio 1, and that was it really. Sort of like-minded people set up these pirate radio stations, and we used to sort of play the music that we liked. So this is going right back to my very early days, which is kind of the end of disco, really, and so a lot of kind of black music and stuff that wasn't really being played on the mainstream radio. And what was amazing is, these stations got a really big following, and it was a really good training ground because the main one I worked on, which is called Radio Jackie, was incredibly well organised, and actually, I mean, having worked at quite a few radio stations since, it was actually one of the most organised places. You had a weekly meeting with all the DJs and everything, and the guy that ran it was, quite strict and a bit scary, and it was in the days of letters, before text and all that, so people used to write in, and they'd actually monitor how many letters you were getting and stuff, and what the reaction was, and so you were sort of, you got a bit of a grilling after your show and all that, but it was, it was a really good training ground, and I really enjoyed it.
I can imagine. Well, obviously you were well into your music growing up, and you said as a teenager this was your first break on radio, and you did DJing as well. You were DJing in clubs at an early age. But why radio? What was it that attracted you to radio?
It's a really interesting question. I think basically when I was sort of much younger, probably, I don't know, I'm becoming a bit of a radio addict probably from at least sort of 10 years old. And I think it was just sort of lying in bed with the radio under your bed and listening to all these radio stations at night and just thinking, wow, that sounds so exciting. And I loved a wide variety of great broadcasters. I remember Kenny Everett was one of my favourites, a real sort of pioneer, and he was so entertaining and so clever. And then there was music DJs. There was a guy called Greg Edwards I used to listen to on Capital Radio who used to do this live show from a club, and I just used to, I was too young to go. I was about 14 or something, or 13, and I just remember, I used to listen in the bath. I think that just sounds so amazing, and he just brought the whole thing alive, and it just made me think, wow, I'd love to do that. It sounds like everyone's having such a great time. Yeah,
and you mentioned on Pirate Radio you played a lot of hip-hop, R&B, soul, and you're more known for dance now, but that was something that you did quite a lot of in the late 80s. You brought a lot of famous artists over from the US to the UK to play, and then you went on to work for Kiss as well in its infancy, again, which was a mixture of dance and R&B, wasn't it?
It was really, yeah. I mean, Kiss was an interesting one because Kiss was originally a pirate radio station, and what happened is the government brought in new legislation, and they said if the pirate stations agreed to come there, we will give, or we won't guarantee it, but we might give a pirate radio station a license. So it was a big gamble, and Kiss came off air. I was working for the BBC at the time on Radio London, but I went on their application for the license, and didn't go down very well with the BBC, who then fired me. But luckily we did get a license, and so that became the first 24-hour dance music station in London and in the UK. And then it was a mixture on that station of what was early house music into rave, but also it had R&B, soul and reggae as well. So it was a great kind of melting pot of music, and I think it helped break a lot of artists at that time.
Yeah, and of course then Radio 1 was beckoning. How did that happen? Was that because of the Kiss show?
I think it was because of the Kiss show, because essentially what happened is that Kiss became a bit of an overnight sensation in London. We always believed that it would work, but I think the industry itself were very sceptical. And even, I remember when the station got the license, it was quite hard to get advertising because advertising agencies didn't understand the proposition that there would be this new kind of radio. But what happened is, within, I don't know, maybe less than a year, we got about 1.5 million listeners. So it suddenly became a really big force, and we made Radio 1 sound really, really old because it was quite anarchic, Kiss. We really did have free reign, and they, what was great is the management really wanted it to be, the phrase was your radical radio, so it was pretty out there. And the bosses at Radio 1 were listening, and they basically started picking us off, So they took Judge Jules, they took Danny Rampling, and it was a great honour and offer to be, asked to go there and take what you did to a national audience. And so, it was an interest, we sort of went in and helped regenerate Radio 1, I guess, in a way.
Definitely, because you went on to present The Breakfast Show now and again for Chris Evans. You did your own dance anthem show that ran for 10 years, and it was one of the biggest shows on Radio 1. It just showed how massive dance music was in the late 90s.
It certainly was. It was an interesting time because the music was just so amazing, obviously. And I think because we did a lot of... one of the things I was keen to do was take a lot of the live events side of what I'd been doing with Kiss and try and get Radio 1 to do that a bit more, because when I was on Kiss, we used to, put on our own weekly events and broadcast them live on the radio. So one of the things I came up with at Radio 1 was... the idea of doing these dance parties, because I used to do the Radio 1 Roadshow, but I noticed in the evening the vehicles were sitting there doing nothing, and I was like, what if we could we use this stuff at night? It's just sitting there. And they were like, yeah, maybe. And I was like, well, why don't we get DJs to come and spin and put on a free outdoor party? So that's what we did. And at the first one, they were like, oh, well, maybe like a couple hundred people turn up. But I think we had 10,000 or something turned up. Yeah. So they became really big, and so it was an exciting time. The music was great, and we encompassed all those elements. And then, of course, we started doing the Ibiza Weekenders and all of that. And so I think it was a mixture of sort of great music, but also kind of having a kind of one-on-one interaction with the audience where people could actually come and see the shows and be part of it. And the great thing about those open-air free events was that, you didn't have to be 18 or over. So I think a lot of people tell me now that they came when they were, 13 or 14, and that was their first introduction to seeing that music in a big, exciting environment. And then, those people stayed with us for 10 years, which was great.
Yeah, and it's still going on today. These parties and these shows are going on. But you were also, within that time, the first voice heard on Radio 1 this millennium. That's something that no one else can say.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we were doing this. It was, I don't know if you remember the millennium. There was a lot of talk about that everything was going to break down and computers were going to stop working and all this. So it was a bit terrifying. So we were doing the show live from Glasgow, an outdoor event for 25,000 people, and nobody really knew what was going to happen. So I had, as well as having record decks, I had tape decks there. We had cartridge player things, we had DAT machines, we had all these different devices and things to play stuff, because no one really knew if anything was just going to break down. But yeah, I was so at and we were broadcast, as well as in the UK, it was going out around the world, and so yeah, I was on at midnight, so I did the first, had the job of bringing everyone into the new millennium, which was quite exciting, quite profound at the time.
Yeah. Can you remember what you said, the first thing you said from 2000?
I can't remember, but I think it was something about, peace and, I don't know, it was something quite sort of along the lines of peace and unity type thing. And I did play, it was like, what record do you play? What do you play? It was such a hyped occasion. So, I actually played a bit of the Beatles' All You Need Is Love, because I thought that was the best lyric of the last, years before, if you picked out one message. So I used that, and then I cut it up with some dance, and we went, kind of went from that into like a big dance medley that I put together in a studio. Yeah. So it was because the pressure was like, oh my God, what did you play? Everyone's going to judge you on it, and it's got to be something quite prolific. So that's what I went with, and
Wow.
it seemed to do the job.
Yeah, for sure. And going back quickly, we just mentioned first. I bet you can't remember the first record you played on the radio, can you?
Do you know, I can't. I know it sounds terrible, really. No, I just don't know what it would be. I think I've probably done too many shows now to really remember what it was. But I do remember, obviously, the first time you do a show, you're dead nervous, and it's terribly exciting. It was. I had a lot of fun. I mean, what was good in those early days as well is there was so much freedom in if you were on air, they kind of left you to it really, and so you were able to sort of take quite a few risks and sort of be not exactly make it up as you go along, but pretty much doing that, and it was a lot less regulated than it is now. So I think that was a good time, to be doing that kind of stuff.
I always say that radio's theatre of the mind because you're basically in somebody's head and you're painting a picture of what's going on, whether it's, might be a bit of a ruse, might be a bit of a lie. But you say you've got a bank of phone people sitting in the studio with the producers when basically it's just you and a cup of tea. So you've got to create something for the people listening and make it interesting, as well as the music's got to be good, I suppose. But fast forward to now, you still do radio shows, you do your podcasts, which you can get from your website. Again, I was just reading up on that. Now, the difference is people send you music digitally, of course. They'll email you music. When you used to get records pushed through the post, you must have had a big letterbox back in the day. But now, obviously, it's
back
a lot
in the
easier.
day. I mean, we literally had those Royal Mail sacks that you see the postman, those big grey sacks. I mean, we used to have literally 2 or 3 of those a week to go through, just tons and tons and tons of stuff. And actually, it's funny because, people aren't in the industry, like DJs, what do you do? We're all lazy, whatever. But I mean, half of your week was just listening to all this stuff because you never knew if there was a gem in there somewhere, and you might have gone through 200 records and they were all terrible, and you're really depressed, and then suddenly you find this absolutely amazing record. And now, as you say, it's digital, so now you have your inbox absolutely full of promos, and again, it takes a long time, but to go through it. But it's really, I still like supporting new artists, and so I mean, the weird thing about a podcast is that obviously you don't really have any way of advertising it, so people just kind of find it, and we have listeners all over the world, and the host of it, which is a company called Podmatic, they kind of show you a map of the world of where people are, so you get people in China and all these different places, which is amazing, really, that they just find it because that's what they're looking for. And so for niche music, this is a trance thing that I do, it's, it's really, really good because you can totally play what you want, and if it's any good, people will find it and support it.
Definitely. Well, the final question, it's an obvious one as well. Have you got any tips for any up-and-coming DJs, especially radio presenters? Because that's obviously what we're trying to cover today. Yeah.
Well, I think it's, try and be yourself and be as individual as you can, so that people know you for something, that they can really identify with you. And I think the problem is nowadays that everything's a bit formulaic. So if you can still, within the guidelines of whatever the organisation wants you to do, inject some of your personality into it, then then that's a really good thing to do. So try and be confident, like you said. I think and lots of DJs have said it before, is I always felt when I was broadcasting on a live radio show that there was just one person that I was talking to, and that it was a very direct thing, and as if they're sitting over the other side of the room or whatever, and whereas in reality on Radio 1, there was maybe 4 or 5 million people listening, but you just think of it as a one-on-one. And I think that's the beauty of radio, is it is that kind of intimate sort of connection, if you like. And, if you're on at certain times of day, you can think about what people might be doing. And so with dance anthems, I always knew that, the TV on Sunday night was terrible, so people would be like, oh, that's rubbish. And people were doing their revision. Yeah. In our audience, there was, either college kids or school people maybe not actually doing their homework, but trying to listen, trying to get an escape through the radio. So, I kind of based a lot of it around what I thought people were doing in that lifestyle at the time, and the experiences that they were having, or what they'd have been doing the night before, make it kind of relevant to to their lives, really.
For sure. Well, you're a legend. Thank you very much for coming on the show. A lot of people who are listening will have grown up listening to you. You can still catch you now over at davepearce.co.uk. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
All right, then. Take care. See ya.